in our previous video, we'd gotten queuing mailer actions working. So creating a mailer class and then getting a hold of the mailer and submitting a job to the Redis queue, and then using a worker and with the correct configuration specified for the worker or workers to be able to send the emails off using your worker taking jobs off the queue. But when we were doing that, we created this email form, and when we click notify, yes, it is submitting the information and submitting jobs to the queue, as we can see, but this form is a little bit rudimentary. So I thought we could look at something in the CakePHP documentation which you'll probably have to use if you're using forms that are not backed by ORM entities or tables. Now, what's an entity and what's a table? Well, you'll have to click on those links and do some research. But an entity is a record in a database table, and the table is obviously relates to the database table itself. So if you're looking at this, CakePHP converts every line into an entity here, and then it refers to the table as that collection of records as well. So we're going to just clean up this particular form by using Modelless Forms here. So to get started with that, just bear with me as I clean up, just close this. We're just going to create bin cake bake, and we're going to create a form, and we're going to call it the notify form. Now this notify form goes into SRC. If we minimize everything, it goes into SRC, form, notify form, and there's a number of different things here that really relate to how we're going to display our form and validate it and all those sorts of things. So we're going to look at the execute method as well. But to get started, let's tie this form into our form that we can see here. So how do we do that? Open up the controller and the action that displays the form, and at the top above where you're checking for whether it's a post or not, do form new and just new up your form. And what you can do here is new up the form and then go to the bottom and then pass that instantiated form through to the view, and then go to your view, and at the moment this is a null context form if you look here, but now we're going to give it a context of that form. Now nothing exciting, if we viewed that form and clicked notify, nothing exciting would have happened, but we're just going to look at this form to see what is going to change as we add things to the form and pass it back to this view. So at the moment we've got this body field, and typically, yeah, a subject might be a single line, but a body will be multi-line. So going into our notify form, we've got two sections that affect how forms display. So we're going to add a field, and the name of the field is the body, and then it says, okay, with this we need to add attributes, which is an array, and we're going to call it type. And generally, if you have a look at our migrations, you'll see that the migration specifies a string field, and typically that means it's a varchar and it's 255 characters. But we could say for a body field, well, we want a lot more than 255 characters in there, and we could specify this would then be a text field. And we can then say, well, using this modelless form, we're going to change what the form thinks of that body field, and just by changing it to text here, notice as we go back and refresh, notice the body field as we do that. And we might make sure that our code compiles before we do that. How about that? And as you can see, notice that the body field is now changed into a text area. So there's something that we're doing to make things different. Now, if we're going to specify a lot of fields, we can use the add fields command, and again, it's a little bit different, but if we said subject, we could then specify here that the type would be, in this case, string. And we can add multiple fields or an individual field there, it doesn't matter. So that's, again, we're just going to make sure it compiles and just reload, and nothing really has changed from making that change. The next thing we have, this is multiple things, so we need to sort of create some validation, and we now want to say, well, I don't want the subject to be empty and it's a string, so I'm going to say not empty string subject, and then I want not empty string for a body. So we can make sure that's correct. And then finally, we're doing something a little bit different here, because we notice that it passes back an array. So we want to say not empty array, and that's the users field. Now when we reload that form, notice what happens when we try to do something that's not working. Every time it's blank, it basically says no. Now this is where something interesting happens here. So I've selected a couple, but notice how it's going, hey, I still want every single one of these checkboxes to be filled in, which is not right. So what it's done, it's looked at that rule and it's just got the wrong idea. So what we need to do is go into our notify template here and just turn off the required attribute. And once we do that, we've gone test here, we've got body here, 2 lines, and we can see that if we don't do anything, we have, when we go and notify, nothing seems to be happening. It's not. We know it's not. If we refresh, we know. We just turn. I'll turn the bin cake. We'll turn the worker on. We'll call it processor 1. All right. So get rid of everything that's in the queue there, and then we attempt to think. But notice there's nothing in here at all. So there's nothing being passed through because it's failing validation, but we're not seeing any reason why. So going back to our users controller, what we're now going to do is start to make it so that this form is controlling whether or not we send notifications. So we're going to change this and say we're going to check if this data validates. So above, maybe right here, we're going to say if this form, and we're going to say validate validate the data for that form, then continue. So if we get rid of this, we don't need that anymore. The form's going to validate whether it's got an array in it or not, so we don't need to check for that. So if the form validates, do this. Now what happens now when we try this, if we scroll down, suddenly we've got an error message. We're getting an error message populated into our field because it's doing the validation and saying it's not right. Now there's two things you can do here. You can either choose the validate method, and that is perfectly okay. If you get this, if you get that, get that here. Look, if we go to this, go else. So if it's not successful, if it's not successful, let's just make sure that we can see. Go this flash error invalid data, and let's see that now in the GUI. So we can see that it's failing, and it's now giving us some feedback. So we can use the flash method to do that. Now let's do one that's going to not fail validation, and then we can see that it's okay. So we might say when it's successful, this flash success, and then we said say sent, and then we might say count, and that's just something like user IDs and then emails. We might select 2, and again we'll get that right. Go back, test body, and send. Right. So now we're successfully validating our form. Now there's another method, and we're getting a nice error message when it's not working, and you get field help as well with that. Now there's another challenge here that, or another method that we'd just like to have a look at. Notice this one here, it's the execute method. So defines what to execute once the form is processed. So what we can do, go to this log. Now that's not correct, so it's not the log argument. So we need to get CakePHP's log helper here. Let's go use the log trait, and from there we can now say this log, and we're going to just use print r to take the data, and true says to return it. Okay, so this is slightly different. We can use just the validate method, or another method is the execute method. And then it says here, it first validates the form, then calls the underscore execute hook. So once we do that, go here, let's tail and follow the log file, and let's see what happens when we again, so that's going to hit the invalid, so it's hit execute but it's invalid. And now let's go back in and see what we're seeing then. So notice the array of data passed through. It's all the information from the form is just getting passed to the execute, sorry, wrong place, the execute method, and it has to return true, and that's just the important thing there. But notice that we could then do all sorts of different logic here, even though we don't have the access to all the table before save and all those events after save, but this could be very similar to respond to what's going on in our application or doing side effects and other things. Okay, so that's a very simple sort of thing. I just wanted to show you that you can also go a little bit further with this sort of error messages and those sorts of things. When you have this form and it's doing an execute and it's when it fails, the form stores that information. So what we can do, let's just debug and dump and die, sorry, the form getErrors. And so let's make a failure by just removing these things here, so there's nothing selected. And notice what it does. It just says, oh, it gives us the field that's the problem, the rule that's failed, and the rule text. So for one thing that we could do, we could do this. We could say the errors are, so let's get the array keys from this, so that'll give us all our field errors. And then with those array keys, I want you to map over them and just run a new inflector, so CakePHP utility, and run the humanize method on them. And then once you've made everything look the way it looks in the GUI, the field name, just do another thing with another text utility method, which is another Cake utility method, which is make them into a list. And what that means is if there's multiples, it'll be a list like users field, body field, and then it'll have an and if there's a last one, and that'll be something like that. So now we can say invalid data, and then say, and then do that. And there. So now again we go back to our put, and then just say, okay, we can then really specify at the top level. It could be check the users field or whatever, but you could have two forms of error reporting in your form. So that would really make things look a lot nicer. So finally, we've tidied up our form, and we now have information being passed into what's going on here. So yeah, we're getting information passed in. Let's now make a little change to our emails to make them a little bit more pretty. Let's have a look at what we're seeing in the emails to start with. So we've got welcome Eileen Ball. She's been notified. Boyle, sorry. And there's no text, and it needs a little bit of improving. So let's do that as a final part for this video. So go into our mailer. So in our mailer here, our notify mailer, and we're going to accept a little bit more information. We're going to say I want an array, and we're going to take some more information in. Now we're sending a notification and we're not including the body. So let's do that. So we go array, we're going to take some data in, and we need to pass that through to our email view files. So take that and pass it through. And now let's go down to our email templates, and we've got just a default notify template, but let's see what happens when we add that. So we're going to say, okay, let's remove that, and we'll just use this, and we'll say we want the subject, and we definitely don't want to do that. We want to escape it if it's got something noxious in it, and subject and body, and that gives us that. We just now need to, when we're notifying, so we're going to send a bit more information through here. So the third thing is we've unset the users, but we want to keep the data, so the body and subject data. So we're just going to pass that through here, and let's see how that works. And notify. So it's saying it sent 4 methods. Let's have a look at MailHog and look at the last few messages. Let's try that again. Okay, so undefined variable body on line 23. Now our problem here is that we haven't restarted the worker, so that's something to look out for. Always restart your workers. Let's try that once more and see if I've got that correct. And it seems that that's a dead version of MailHog. Let's have a look. Now at the moment that's good. We've got the notification text coming through quite nicely, but it's still what we call ugly. So how do we make it a little bit more pretty? Well, we need to give ourselves a HTML template. So let's create a notify template, and we're going to use this. It'll be PHP, but let's say, hi, welcome to the network, and create a paragraph, and we'll say the subject is subject, and the body, just copy that again. Actually, we need to give it everything and give it a copy, and body is body. And now we need to specify in our mailer that we're now going to take a different email format. Now there's 3 options for email format, and it can be text or HTML or both. So if it's both, we definitely need to specify both templates here, otherwise you'll get error messages. Let's see now. Just restart our worker, go back to here, test, welcome to the new job, you will be paid next week. Alright, so let's change it a few, because we've seen these people a few more times. Give it a few other people, Twillia or Twilla, and then have a look at our new messages, and there we have our Cake mailer delivering things through via the queue. And again, if we create another split terminal, just remember to always specify the same, when we're pulling from the same queue, to specify the same processor. And giving you a view of that, we just select a heap of emails, and it just shows that it will the worker will just grab what it can, and you'll see that both sides are now being populated by the queue. So that is how to use Modelless Forms, how to add a little bit more information to your email and your mailing classes, and just some of the gotchas that might occur when using CakePHP and specifically the plugin that is CakeQ.